Meghan a geriatric mother. The family claims and state that Meghan had a hysterectomy. How can a woman with a hysterectomy be pregnant? And most of all, why did the royal family go along with this? And what's going to happen now that this has come out? This is a punishable crime. This is fraud in the highest levels.
It makes me uncomfortable.
What makes Meghan Markle's royal birth story so hard for critics to ignore is that it does not read like a tense hospital moment at all. It reads like a glossy scene from a celebrity drama, full of soft lighting, perfect timing, and details that sound almost too neat to be real. Picture the image Prince Harry painted. Candles glowing, calm music playing, Meghan looking collected, and Harry joking around after using the laughing gas meant for her. Instead of sounding like a high-pressure royal birth, the whole thing comes off more like a luxury spa scene with a royal title attached to it. At first glance, it sounds sweet and personal, but once you slow down and look at the details, the story begins to wobble fast, not medically, not logistically, and definitely not in the way people expect a royal birth to unfold. That is why the story keeps pulling people back in. It is polished in a way that almost squeaks. And for critics, that polish is exactly what makes it suspicious. The more the story is repeated, the more some people feel like they are not hearing a raw memory at all. They feel like they are hearing a carefully shaped narrative, built to sound emotional, intimate, and impossible to question. That is also why every new claim or outside comment seems to hit so hard. Once public figures began raising questions and challenging the timeline,
silence everybody and just produce a DNA sample or proof of delivery.
It's like she's playing a human being, like it's a performance. But I gotta tell you the story because it's amazing. Stop everything. You're not gonna believe me because it is a never-ending saga, a never-ending strange tale. People were not paying attention to other smaller stories.
That fairy tale shine started cracking almost immediately. Meghan has long been seen by critics as someone who knows exactly how to frame a story for maximum effect. Fair or not, that image follows her everywhere. So when this birth story landed with all the soft focus details and dramatic little flourishes, people did not just hear romance. They heard spin. They heard image control. They heard another chapter in a pattern where the story shifts depending on who is asking the questions. And that pattern is what gives this whole issue real bite. Critics say that every time the pressure builds, the explanation changes. First, it is privacy. Then, it is unfair treatment. Then, it is that the press twisted the facts. But in this case, the biggest problem may be the timeline of Harry and Meghan's own words. That is where the story starts looking less like a heartfelt account and more like a plot with holes in it. 2 epidurals, a quick Nando's run, and back home within 2 hours. Even people who are not experts hear that and go, come on now. It sounds less like a real-life birth and more like a scene written to be memorable. And that is the bigger twist here. This is not just about one dramatic story from one dramatic night. It is about how far a public figure might go to craft an image that feels flawless, moving and cinematic, even when the details leave people squinting. Because once you start treating royal life like a movie set, you cannot be shocked when the audience starts wondering whether the script mattered more than the truth. And when that happens, the mood changes fast. The sparkle fades, the questions get louder, and suddenly what looked touching starts looking staged.
Start twerking, because in her mind she was thinking, I'm going to release this later in a Netflix doc or release it later to show people how relatable I am. Otherwise, you can have a cute moment with your husband without recording it. Like, why would you record this for any reason? Why would you record this in the hospital?
Here, the doctor talks about both the children, and listen to what she says.
So you tell me to tell you something that maybe a dozen people actually know that's going to come out very soon. Okay. Meghan Markle, the reason why you watch her interviews and she just seems off. She's owned by a pharmaceutical company. The 2 children that she had, they're not hers. She didn't have them with Harry. And how her and Harry met is that she's a prostitute.
Prince Harry's memoir, Spare, only pushed that reaction further. In his version, Meghan's labour is described like a dream sequence, not a difficult medical event. The atmosphere sounds almost unreal. Meghan is on a birthing ball. The room is warm and peaceful. Harry is clowning around, and somehow he even jokes about using up the laughing gas. Then, in one of the most talked about details of all, he leaves for Nando's chicken and gets back in time as if the whole birth is unfolding on a clean, easy schedule. It is a scene that definitely grabs attention, but that is also the problem. It feels designed to stick in the public's mind. A touching story, sure, but critics say it feels more scripted than spontaneous. The details read less like the messy memory of exhausted new parents and more like a polished anecdote written for sympathy, branding, and headlines. Everything about it sounds cinematic, effortless, and strangely perfect. But royal births are not usually described that way. They are serious, heavily managed, medically structured, and surrounded by protocol. Yet in Harry's version, there is barely any mention of stress, security pressure, medical teams, or the kind of controlled chaos people would expect in such a high-profile setting. It is mostly candles, jokes, and takeaway chicken.
There is no way on earth that any doctor on this earth would allow a woman with a geriatric pregnancy, high risk, and with 2 epidurals to leave the hospital within an hour of giving birth, which means that the doctors would have had to deliver Archie, spank his ass, wipe Meghan Markle, put her on a van or whatever, and just send her off without testing to see whether there was any nerve damage, because epidurals do that.
That mismatch is what keeps people talking. Most new parents look overwhelmed, tired, emotional, and completely drained after labour, and that is normal. But this version presents Meghan almost like she is glowing through every second, as if the cameras could have started rolling at any moment. To critics, that is a red flag. When a story sounds too flawless, it usually does not calm people down. It makes them look closer. And once that happens, even the smallest detail starts getting pulled apart. Medical commentators and skeptical observers later questioned several parts of Harry's version, calling parts of it unlikely or inconsistent with standard procedures. But the bigger question critics keep asking is simple. Why tell the story this way at all? Why make childbirth sound so cinematic, so smooth, so perfectly framed? Because behind the warm lighting and emotional storytelling, some believe there may be more performance than plain truth. And once that thought gets into people's heads, the whole so-called royal miracle starts looking a lot less miraculous and a lot more like a royal production. Then comes the detail that really crashes the story into hard reality, the so-called 2-hour turnaround. According to Harry, Meghan gave birth at Portland Hospital in central London.
But if you look at this, Meghan Markle has been incredibly quiet about the birth, but mostly the pregnancy of these children. Everything has been shady. The one who's been blabbing and saying crazy things is Prince Harry.
Rested briefly, packed up, and was back at Frogmore Cottage, about an hour away, all within 2 hours total. That claim alone is what made many critics stop being polite and start calling the story flat out implausible. Even an ordinary patient would struggle to leave that fast after giving birth. But a duchess with non-stop security, medical observation, and newborn checks, that is where the timeline starts looking wild. The numbers just do not play nicely with the story. The drive alone takes about an hour in light traffic. That leaves roughly 60 minutes for labour recovery, infant monitoring, discharge paperwork, and organising secure transport through one of the busiest cities in the world. Critics say that is not just fast, it is ridiculously fast. Doctors have pointed out that someone who supposedly had an epidural would usually need a longer observation period before discharge. Even private hospitals do not casually rush a mother and newborn out the door just because the patient is important. If anything, high-profile status usually adds more layers, not fewer. Then there is royal protocol on top of the medical side. Normally, movements involving senior royals come with planning, security coordination, and a level of structure that is hard to hide. But in this case, critics point to the silence. No public confirmation from staff, no major witness trail, no obvious signs of the kind of movement people would expect in a case this sensitive. Just Harry's word that they slipped out quietly, almost like a royal stealth mission. And for a lot of skeptical viewers, That is exactly where the alarm bells started ringing loudly. If the story does not line up with medicine, and does not line up with monarchy either, people naturally start asking what exactly they are being asked to believe. That is why critics say this is not some tiny inconsistency that can be brushed aside. To them, it is a full-on timeline glitch sitting right in the middle of a massive public story. And once you notice it, the rest of the account starts looking shakier by the minute. The medical side only deepens that skepticism. In Spare, Harry said Meghan had 2 epidurals during labour, and that line alone raised eyebrows everywhere. Critics pointed out that an epidural is not some casual little add-on you pop in and out without reason. It involves a catheter and a controlled process. If more medication is needed, it is generally adjusted through the same line, not treated like a brand new redo. So, when Harry described it in a loose, easy way, professionals and skeptical readers immediately started questioning whether the account had been simplified, misunderstood, or dramatised for effect. Then there is the laughing gas story, which got almost as much attention. In hospitals like Portland, nitrous oxide is controlled and monitored. Critics say partners do not just grab the mask and freestyle until the tank is empty. That detail may have been intended as funny or charming, but it had the opposite effect on many readers. Instead of making the moment feel human, it made it sound even more unbelievable. Add in the candlelit room image, and the whole thing starts sounding less like a hospital memory and more like a high-end commercial pretending to be real life. And Portland Hospital itself only makes the story more awkward for critics to accept. It is not some random, chaotic maternity ward. It is one of London's best-known private hospitals, famous for elite patients, strict procedure, and discretion. Every movement, every visitor, and every process is handled carefully. So when Harry described what sounded like a magical birth followed by a lightning-fast exit, critics say it clashed badly with the kind of environment Portland is known for. A quick discharge after epidural-assisted labour already sounds doubtful to many observers. Add a royal patient to the mix, and the idea of slipping out unseen starts sounding even harder to believe. Even the Nando's run gets dragged into the argument. Portland is known for high-end service and full hospitality, so the image of Harry leaving for takeaway chicken sounds odd on its own. It is one of those details that makes the story more colourful, but also more suspicious to critics. Because if the hospital already offers luxury service, why does the story need that extra quirky detail? To some, it feels less like a natural memory and more like a scene written to sound relatable, cheeky, and unforgettable. That is why every logistical detail from that night keeps collapsing under scrutiny for people who already doubt the story. No obvious public trace, no believable timing, no smooth fit with standard postnatal care, and no easy explanation for how everything supposedly happened so fast. So critics keep circling back to the same question. If Meghan did not leave the hospital under those exact conditions, then what really happened? Because the deeper people dig into the details, the more this starts looking less like a clear account of a royal birth and more like a royal narrative built for headlines, image, and maximum impact. What made Meghan's royal birth story stand out was not just the hospital confusion. It was how completely it broke from royal tradition. Royal births usually follow a script older than the modern monarchy itself, precise, public, and carefully documented. When Princess Diana gave birth, cameras lined up outside St Mary's Hospital. When Kate Middleton delivered, the palace moved fast with official statements and that famous photo on the hospital steps. In royal life, transparency is not optional. It is part of the ritual. But when it came to Meghan, everything seemed to turn upside down. There was no clear notice to the press, no royal aide visibly managing the moment, and no photo call outside the hospital doors. Instead, the palace released a vague statement hours later saying Meghan had gone into labour after Archie had apparently already been born. Even veteran royal correspondents called the whole thing bizarre and unprecedented. It was not just secrecy, it was confusion. And in a family built on ceremony, confusion like that always gets people talking. Reports also claimed the Queen was not informed right away, which critics saw as a stunning break from protocol, considering Archie's place in the line of succession. The royal rota, normally central to birth announcements, was left piecing the story together from the outside. And when Meghan later spoke about why things were handled differently, the reasons seemed to keep shifting, from privacy to protecting the baby to blaming the media for racism and intrusion. But for critics, none of those explanations really fix the timing problems or the communication gaps. That is why people started asking what exactly was being hidden. Because if everything was as normal as they claimed, then why did this unfold so differently from every royal birth before it? There were no proud hospital steps, no smooth rollout, no familiar royal rhythm, and that is where the contradictions began piling up fast. By the time Meghan gave birth, she was 37, an age that often means closer medical observation during pregnancy. Later, she also revealed she had suffered from preeclampsia, a serious condition that can require strict monitoring, medication, and extended hospital recovery. Yet somehow, this supposedly high-risk birth story ends with Meghan leaving quickly, looking composed and camera-ready. That alone made a lot of people raise their eyebrows. Most women dealing with even mild preeclampsia are usually kept under supervision for at least 24 to 48 hours after delivery. But Meghan's public version skipped over that part almost entirely. There was little mention of observation, medication, or recovery time. Then, in the days after Archie's birth, she appeared in front of cameras at Windsor Castle, dressed, polished, and fully composed. To critics, the image looked less like recovery and more like presentation. They argued that every public moment felt curated, from her posture to her outfit to the overall visual message of calm, strength, and serenity. That is why commentators like Candace Owens seized on the contradictions, not because they claimed clear proof, but because they argued too many puzzle pieces just did not fit. How does someone go from a high-risk patient to a flawless royal debut almost overnight? That question became one of the biggest sticking points in the whole saga. And just when people thought the timeline and medical gaps were enough, the paperwork added even more fuel to the fire. The birth certificate drama opened a whole new layer of confusion. Early reports named Dr. Penelope Law as the delivering physician, but that detail was later disputed, revised, and quietly scrubbed from some coverage. For a royal birth, critics said that kind of inconsistency was highly unusual. Every name, every line, every signature is supposed to be airtight, but this record seemed to shift, and that only made people more suspicious. Then came the name change controversy. Meghan's name on Archie's birth certificate was altered from Rachel Meghan, Her Royal Highness the Duchess of Sussex, to Her Royal Highness the Duchess of Sussex. The palace reportedly described it as a clerical correction, but critics did not buy that explanation. They argued that no royal mother before her had made that kind of post-registration change, and the move instantly triggered a fresh wave of speculation. Why change an official record later unless there was a reason? That was when online rumours exploded all over again. Surrogacy speculation that had been floating around since 2019 came roaring back, amplified by commentators insisting the receipts did not line up. They did not always claim direct proof, but they kept pointing to the same issue: too many inconsistencies, too many revisions, and too many strange details for the public to ignore. And that is exactly why this story stayed alive. When you piece it all together, the hospital timeline, the medical contradictions, the missing royal protocol, and the altered records, critics say one truth becomes hard to ignore. Meghan's royal birth story does not just have small cracks. To them, it looks built on them. What started as a shining modern royal fairy tale now reads, in the eyes of skeptics, more like a Hollywood script that forgot to check whether the details actually held up. Every magical part of the story now feels less natural and more strategic to those critics. And that is why this still is not the end of the saga. Because just when people thought the mystery had cooled down, Claims began circulating that palace insiders were quietly reviewing birth-related records involving Archie and Lilibet again. Those reports remain heavily disputed, but they were enough to reignite the whole fire. And what is being whispered behind palace walls has only made the controversy louder. If you think this part was wild, you need to watch our previous video covering how Meghan reportedly reacted when the palace began reopening questions around her children's birth records. It is the missing piece that connects this whole drama and makes the story even harder to ignore. So drop your thoughts in the comments, hit like, subscribe, ring that bell, and stay tuned, because this royal drama is far from over.